Dirk Bogarde, born Derek Jules Gaspar Ulrich Niven van den Bogarde on March 28, 1921, stands as one of Britain's most intriguing and multifaceted performers. Yet calling him solely an actor barely scratches the surface of his accomplishments. He was also a respected writer, a veteran with first-hand knowledge of World War II's brutality, a symbol of controversy thanks to his bold choice in roles, and a deeply private man who burned most of his personal documents to shield himself from public scrutiny. Bogarde's journey begins in a middle-class home in West Hampstead, London, where cracks in family harmony shaped his early outlook. His father worked as an art editor at a major newspaper, and his mother had once been an actress, which may have planted a tiny seed of theatrical ambition in young Derek's mind. Their marriage, however, appeared neither stable nor affectionate, and young Derek found himself struggling to feel at ease in his own household. Eventually, his parents sent him to stay with relatives, an aunt and uncle known for their strict discipline, perhaps hoping to instill structure in his life. Yet, regardless of external pressures or shifting living arrangements, Derek's desire to perform only grew, eventually becoming unstoppable. His childhood featured a patchwork of emotional challenges that forced him to adapt quickly, learning how to navigate the complexities of adult tension while still in short trousers. At home, he sensed a coldness between his parents, an environment far from nurturing. Living with an aunt and uncle might have provided discipline, but it could hardly have offered the warmth he likely yearned for. In this climate of uncertainty, acting became a refuge. Derek found that stepping into roles, even small, uncredited ones, gave him a thrilling sense of purpose. He was determined to make it onto the stage, feeling drawn by the glow of footlights and captivated by the unique alchemy of performance. Despite the distractions and the disapproval he might have encountered, he insisted that nothing would deter him from acting. Little did he know how drastically the world would soon shift as rumblings of war began to reverberate across Europe. By the time he reached 18, his dreams of theatrical success collided with the imminent reality of global conflict. Although he tried to stay involved in London theater, fate had other plans. With each passing day, the war effort loomed, making it harder to remain simply a civilian with show business aspirations. When Britain entered World War II, he joined the Queen's Royal Regiment before eventually becoming an officer in the Intelligence Corps, marking a decisive break from the life he had imagined. The young Derek, still years away from calling himself Dirk Bogarde, was tasked with work that, while not always exposing him to direct frontline combat, still brought him face to face with devastation, moral ambiguity, and the unrelenting horror of total war. One of the most significant moments he would recall involved his proximity to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Toward the end of the war, British forces liberated the camp, uncovering scenes so grim they defied comprehension. Bogarde would later describe it as a real-life manifestation of Dante's Inferno. He had gone there initially hoping, with almost naive practicality, to find suitable German boots, only to discover piles of emaciated prisoners, both living and dead. The anguish, suffering, and sheer cruelty imprinted themselves indelibly on his psyche. Debate has since arisen about whether he was truly among the first to enter the camp, but there's no doubt he arrived close to its liberation, witnessing enough to guarantee a lifetime of nightmares. This trauma, combined with the guilt and moral weight of his intelligence role, never left him. Once the war ended, Derek found himself at a crossroads. The horrors he had witnessed couldn't be brushed aside, and the sense of alienation he felt, both from his family and from a society trying to move on as if these atrocities had never happened, steered him even more firmly toward acting. In the post-war era, he seized an opportunity to reinvent himself. Out went Dirk Bogarde, an unwieldy name that still carried the baggage of his youth. In came Dirk Bogarde, sleek, memorable, and ready for the silver screen. It wasn't long before he caught the eye of the Rank Organization, a major film studio in Britain. Though he didn't have the typical matinee idol physique, he was slim, with a distinctive face and a voice some described as slightly higher pitch than expected. He had an undeniable allure. Rank signed him hoping to mold him into a new kind of leading man. Early roles were often lighthearted, perhaps not intellectually stimulating, but they showcased his charisma. Then came Doctor in the House in 1954, the film that would skyrocket him to stardom. This jovial medical comedy turned out to be a runaway success, making him a household name almost overnight and ushering him into a dizzying level of fame. If the war had taught him to handle stress, it certainly didn't prepare him for the frenzied adoration of fans once the camera lights shone on him. Legions of admirers, particularly young women, clamored for his attention. Studio publicity machines portrayed him as the handsome, unmarried leading man, fueling the public imagination with an image of availability and endless romantic potential. In reality, this was a role as carefully scripted as any he performed on screen. He would recall how quickly it all happened, from soldier to star, with scarcely a pause in between. Of course, such rapid fame had a flip side. Die-hard fans took disturbing liberties. One woman arrived at his home in a fancy car, interrupting a private gathering just to announce that he was allegedly the father of her child. It was a sensational claim that underscored how outlandish fan behavior could get. Ironically, few realized that the scenario was impossible for him. Beneath the glowing press photos and that bachelor aura, Dirk Bogarde carried a secret far more consequential than any wild paternity claim. The truth was that he was gay at a time when British law criminalized homosexual acts and newspapers routinely humiliated or destroyed the reputations of those who were exposed. In that era, rumors alone could wreck a career. Many Hollywood and British actors entered sham marriages to quell suspicion, but Bogarde opted not to stage such a public ruse. Instead, he made occasional appearances with women, giving the press a little fodder, and otherwise stayed tight-lipped. What the tabloids never definitively uncovered was his long-term relationship with Anthony Forwood, a British actor and one-time manager with whom Bogarde had crossed paths even before the war. Forwood was older, but they found in each other a rare kind of bond. After Forwood's marriage ended, he and Bogarde renewed their acquaintance and gradually established a domestic life that lasted decades. They moved into a country estate, far from prying eyes, immersing themselves in a routine of creativity, gardening, collecting antiques, and enjoying the companionship of beloved pets. Among friends, their relationship was quietly understood. Officially, Forwood was presented as Bogarde's manager and confidant, but in reality he was much more, a life partner in every sense. This arrangement suited Bogarde's private nature, especially given his haunting experiences during the war. He had no desire to make his personal life a spectacle, particularly in a climate that was still hostile to gay relationships. The success he had attained under the Rank Organization started to feel stifling after a while, though. Many of the films he was making under contract, however profitable, did not challenge him as a performer. He sensed that if he continued accepting safe roles, he would stagnate artistically. By the late 1950s, he was itching for more daring material, characters with real depth and moral complexity. When he finally broke away from Rank, it was akin to ending a long-term relationship that had once been fruitful but no longer felt fulfilling. The risk in severing ties with such a powerful studio was immense. They had nurtured his stardom after all. Still, he believed in his own potential. Shortly thereafter, he took on one of the most provocative roles of his entire career, the lead in Victim, 1961. This groundbreaking film dealt explicitly with homosexuality and blackmail at a time when British law still deemed gay sex a criminal offense. The screenplay was deemed taboo by many, and actors shied away, fearing that even an on-screen association with homosexuality could lead to personal and professional repercussions. Bogarde, however, embraced the challenge, understanding exactly what was at stake for a closeted man. The outcry surrounding Victim was swift and intense. Moral guardians called it disgusting, and censors did their utmost to restrict viewership. Yet critics praised the film's sincerity and lauded Bogarde for his brilliant, nuanced portrayal of a respectable lawyer secretly living in fear of exposure. Unsurprisingly, rumors around Bogarde's own private life grew louder in response, but he never granted them a platform. Despite the attempts to squash or condemn it, Victim made an impact. In subsequent years, politicians working toward legal reforms cited the film as influential in shifting public opinion. Lord Arran, a key proponent of decriminalizing homosexuality in 1967, wrote a letter thanking Bogarde for his courageous involvement. Whether or not Bogarde intended to further any political cause, he had become a part of cinematic and cultural history by showing that a mainstream movie could handle such a sensitive subject without resorting to camp or cliché. Having taken that leap, Bogarde was free to explore an array of more mature and challenging roles. He began collaborating with innovative filmmakers, including Joseph Losey and Luchino Visconti, and starred in films like The Servant, Darling, and Death in Venice. Each performance expanded his range, confirming he was more than a lightweight matinee idol. These were heady times for European cinema. Directors were pushing boundaries, audiences were growing more sophisticated, and Bogarde found himself at the center of that evolving cultural scene. The Servant, Shah, 1963, directed by Losey and penned by playwright Harold Pinter, showcased Bogarde as a manipulative manservant who gradually inverts the power dynamic with his employer. The film's claustrophobic tension and psychological complexity revealed an entirely new dimension of Bogarde's acting skills, and he won a BAFTA for Best Actor. Similarly, John Schlesinger's Darling, 1965, cast him alongside Julie Christie, exploring the glamorous but soulless world of London's fashion and media circles. By then, any leftover traces of his early comedic persona had given way to a more intense, often unsettling presence. Perhaps his most famously haunting role from that era was in Visconti's Death in Venice, 1971, where he played Gustav von Aschenbach, a composer obsessed with an ethereal boy. The film was visually sumptuous, meditative, and tragic. Bogarde's portrayal, a study in suppressed longing and existential dread, became iconic, even if it further fueled speculation about his own sexuality. Rather than discourage talk, Bogarde stayed on course, devoting himself to the craftsmanship of acting while maintaining strict control over his personal narrative. Back at home, he and Tony Forwood were living in a bubble of relative tranquility. Their household was filled with various pets, from dogs to cats, and they were known to friends as gracious hosts who relished good conversation, vintage wines, and the English countryside's gentle rhythms. The public believed him to be a bachelor, or at least that was the official line. Colleagues and close companions, of course, were aware of the truth, but there was a tacit understanding that this was not to be publicized. In the context of mid-century Britain, secrecy wasn't just about privacy. It was a protective shield. One scandalous article could land him in legal jeopardy or ensure an abrupt end to his career. As it was, the success of films like Victim and The Servant showed that audiences were prepared to follow him into deeper, more daring territory, but that didn't mean they or the law were ready to accept the reality of a gay leading man. Through careful discretion, Bogarde remained one of the country's biggest film icons, winning awards and racking up box office acclaim, while never yielding to the tabloids' hunger for personal revelations. He had mastered the art of appearing open and engaging, yet divulging little. As the 1970s progressed, Bogarde gradually scaled back his acting commitments. He had proven his range beyond question, and the desire to keep repeating the same success formula didn't appeal to him. Instead, he began devoting more energy to writing, a pursuit that had simmered in the background for years. Over time, he authored a series of novels and autobiographical works, starting with A Postilion Struck by Lightning in 1977. Critics and readers alike were intrigued by his prose, which could be lyrical, reflective, and quietly revealing, though rarely in an overt, confessional manner. Indeed, some critics voiced frustration that while Bogarde wrote extensively, he often seemed to sidestep the topics that fascinated his readers, his wartime experiences, and his private relationships. Rather than offering explicit personal confessions, he preferred to convey atmosphere, anecdote, and impression. This style both captivated and occasionally infuriated literary critics. Yet for Bogarde, who had spent a lifetime guarding his secrets, it felt natural. Writing allowed him to express nuanced reflections on subjects like fame, memory, and solitude without fully unclothing his inner self. Some readers believed they could see glimpses of the real man in the lines. Others felt he was still erecting barriers between his words and their curiosity. Nevertheless, his writing career thrived. Bogarde's memoirs and novels consistently attracted attention, each new publication prompting a fresh wave of speculation about whether he might finally offer more direct revelations. But typically, he would remain polite, measured, and skilled at deflecting intrusive queries. By the early 1980s, he had written multiple volumes of autobiography, including Snakes and Ladders, 1978, and An Orderly Man, 1983. His novels, among them Voices in the Garden, 1981, also showcased his fascination with introspection. Many of his fictional characters wrestled with secrecy or moral conflicts, echoing the tensions he himself had juggled for decades. His reputation as a writer grew to the point where some individuals no longer thought of him first and foremost as an actor. Now in his 60s, he maintained a somewhat reclusive lifestyle with Tony Forwood, having carved out a space that allowed him to create without the intrusive glare of press cameras. Occasionally, a compelling film role would coax him back to the screen, but these appearances grew rarer. Interviews he granted around this time reveal a man who was philosophical about aging, having experienced war, stardom, and heartbreak, yet determined to stay composed and, above all, private. But life had more trials in store. Tony Forwood's health began to decline as Parkinson's disease and eventually cancer took hold. Bogarde watched the man, who had been his partner, though never publicly acknowledged as such, deteriorate. Over the years, he'd faced the guilt and trauma of war, but this was a new and more personal agony, caring for someone he loved through a relentless illness. Forwood eventually fell into a coma and passed away in 1988, leaving Bogarde profoundly bereft. While he had coped with loneliness before, this particular loss was devastating. He found himself rattling around a house that suddenly felt unbearably empty. Friends have noted that he never really recovered from Forwood's death, though he persevered with writing, tried to maintain some form of routine, and continued to live on his own terms. One consequence of witnessing Forwood's suffering was Bogarde's growing conviction that euthanasia should be a legal option for those facing unbearable pain. He spoke more openly about this belief in subsequent interviews, linking it back to the war's horrors and the moral imperative to prevent needless suffering. He didn't launch public campaigns or political movements, yet it was clear that his experiences had shaped him into a reluctant advocate for end-of-life choice. In 1986, 2 years before Forwood died, Bogarde did something drastic to protect both their secrets. He burned virtually all his personal records, journals from World War II, letters and papers that might one day be scrutinized by the public or prying historians. He even destroyed Forwood's documents, ensuring there would be no comprehensive archive for curious biographers or tabloid reporters. To many, this act seemed extreme. Some argue it robbed future generations of crucial historical insights, especially about Bergen-Belsen and the nuance of his private life. But for Bogarde, privacy was paramount, and he refused to let strangers rifle through his most intimate confessions once he was gone. As a man who had already seen how rumor and speculation could balloon into scandal, he took drastic steps to guarantee that no posthumous outing or scandalous detail would overshadow the legacy he had worked so hard to shape. Indeed, the fragments of his story that survive, his published memoirs, scattered letters, and recollections from friends, form only a partial picture, leaving researchers to debate the specifics of his war record and the intricacies of his domestic life. This deliberate erasure underscores the duality of a man who gave much to the public while fiercely protecting his innermost world. As he moved into his 70s, Bogarde faced mounting health challenges of his own. He had always been somewhat frail, and years of smoking took their toll. In 1996, at age 75, he underwent major heart surgery. Following the procedure, he suffered a debilitating stroke that paralyzed his left side and left his speech slurred. This event was cataclysmic for a man who prided himself on self-sufficiency, intellect, and refined diction. Suddenly, he could no longer live independently. A dedicated caregiver, Sheila Milan, stepped in, helping him manage everyday tasks, arrange medical appointments, and maintain some semblance of a normal life. Despite the physical limitations, Bogarde's mind remained alert, and he continued writing, though more slowly, and receiving visitors. He also spoke candidly whenever asked about his support for euthanasia, referencing Tony Forwood's drawn-out suffering and the war's brutality as influential factors in his stance. Still, it was not a crusade so much as a personal belief he felt compelled to share. Over the next 3 years, he battled to keep his spirits up, buoyed by occasional social calls from close friends, the comfort of reading, and the knowledge that Sheila was there to assist him each day. By the late 1990s, Dirk Bogarde was no longer a fixture in the film industry, yet he remained a revered figure. Younger actors and directors admired him for the journey he had taken, from wartime soldier to rank organization heartthrob to daring star of art house classics. When asked about him, many colleagues and critics cited his bravery in taking on roles like the one in Victim, which risked typecasting or career suicide. This willingness to confront taboo subjects in cinema, combined with his delicate handling of them, earned him a unique place in British cultural history. Some fans cherished the comedic warmth of his earlier works. Others revered the psychologically dense roles he tackled later in life, and a sizable group also appreciated his literary efforts. Even though he had never been entirely transparent, curiosity about his private life kept swirling. Rumors floated that he had used his diaries to spin elaborate war stories, or that his personal relationships were more intricate than anyone knew. Yet, at this stage, Bogarde saw no point in clarifying matters. He could not fully articulate them if he wanted to, given his physical condition, and he had already destroyed the written evidence that might have provided definitive answers. On May 8, 1999, at 78, Dirk Bogarde passed away from a heart attack at his home in Chelsea. The news was met with a mixture of sadness, respect, and admiration for a man who had so significantly shaped British film. Tributes poured in from co-stars, directors, and fans who recalled everything from his comedic timing in Doctor in the House to his searing intensity in Death in Venice. Obituaries noted his war service, his literary work, and the quiet dignity he maintained throughout controversies that might have unmade a lesser figure. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were taken to the French estate he had loved, a place that held shared memories of Anthony Forwood and the peaceful life they had forged together. This final gesture symbolized his enduring commitment to privacy and the sanctity of their bond. It was also a reminder that no matter how famous he became, Bogarde's core identity was something he chose to protect fiercely, shielding it from a public that might never fully comprehend him. The scattering of his ashes in a familiar garden, far from prying crowds, was the last step in a carefully orchestrated life of public brilliance and personal discretion. Since his passing, biographers have labored to fill the gaps. One notable attempt was John Coldstream's biography, which meticulously sifted through letters, official records, and testimonies from Bogarde's circle. While Coldstream concluded that Bogarde indeed visited Bergen-Belsen close to its liberation, some details remain muddy, partly due to Bogarde's own reticence, partly because many relevant documents no longer exist. Debates about the authenticity of certain war memories or the precise timing of events continue, yet most scholars agree that the emotional aftermath of the war profoundly shaped Bogarde's worldview. As for his relationship with Tony Forwood, the general consensus is that they were life partners who shared a genuine domestic existence. However, how they navigated the tension between closeted living and an open secret among friends is still something of a puzzle. Ultimately, these remaining mysteries are part of what makes Dirk Bogarde's story so compelling. He managed to carve a path that balanced commercial appeal with artistic daring, capturing hearts in breezy romantic comedies and challenging minds in darker, more demanding films, all while carefully distancing the public from his personal truths. That paradoxical blend of openness and secrecy is precisely what fascinates audiences and researchers alike. Today, many younger cinema enthusiasts discover him through the 1950s Doctor series and are surprised to learn he later starred in critically acclaimed controversial films that tackled deep moral quandaries. Some only see the suave figure on screen, missing the complexity behind the facade. Others might first encounter him through Victim, in film studies courses that highlight its pivotal role in shifting social attitudes toward homosexuality. In either case, once viewers scratch beneath the surface, they realize that Bogarde was far more than a charming face. Indeed, he was an individual shaped by wartime trauma, a man who learned firsthand the fragility of human life and the devastation wrought by hatred, a survivor who carried those images of carnage for the rest of his days. The quiet but determined battle to keep his private life out of the public domain was another thread in his tapestry. He believed in an actor's right to a personal space unassailed by gossip. Moreover, by refusing to stage a lavender marriage, he avoided engaging in a disingenuous charade, which in a way set him apart from other closeted figures of his time. He walked a tightrope, balancing public roles with private truth, and did so with admirable subtlety. Although many lament the destruction of his diaries and letters, his published writings still offer glimpses into his internal landscape. Memoirs like Backcloth, 1986, weave reflections on acting, family, and the sense of displacement he experienced both in wartime and in peacetime. Bogarde occasionally touches on anguish or regrets, but always with restraint, as if he's drawing a sheer curtain rather than fully slamming a door. It's enough to give readers a sense of the man's conflicts, his nostalgia for certain chapters of life, his regret over some professional or personal choices, yet not so much that we can claim to know him intimately. Perhaps this calculated ambiguity was essential for someone who had endured as many intense transformations as he did. One can interpret it as self-protection, or as an attempt to preserve the purity of memories he cherished. Regardless, the result is a layered portrait of a star who confounds attempts at one-dimensional classification. Even people who prefer their celebrities to be open books might find a certain romance in the way he guarded his secrets, ensuring that what he chose to share, his acting, writing, and occasional public statements, was all that the world would receive. In doing so, he upheld a measure of personal sovereignty until the end. In the final reckoning, Dirk Bogarde left behind an extraordinary legacy that intertwines art, memory, and mystery. His childhood, marked by a fractured household, seems to have set the stage for a life of duality, pursuing creativity while bracing himself for the worst that human existence can inflict. World War II left him with lasting psychological scars, but also provided a perspective that fueled his empathy and willingness to confront challenging, cinematic themes. His decision to accept the lead in Victim crystallized his dual role as both artist and unwitting social pioneer, nudging British cinema toward greater candor about forbidden subjects. The secrecy surrounding his private life, especially his enduring love for Tony Forwood, underscores his deft balance between self-preservation and living authentically, albeit discreetly. As a writer, he produced a substantial body of work that remains intriguing for its blend of revelation and careful omission. Finally, his last years, accompanied by failing health and heartbreak over Forwood's death, did not diminish his spirit or his deeply held convictions about a dignified end to life's pains. By orchestrating the destruction of personal papers and finding rest in a cherished French retreat, he preserved for himself one final act of authorship. And that, in essence, was Dirk Bogarde, fiercely talented, quietly radical, and forever keen to direct the narrative of his own existence,